Hello, I'm Joseph Berg. I'm doing an interview on the 16th of January 2015 at the Kramer Library. I'm talking to Tara Burns. Say hi, Tara.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about her experience in the United States Marine Corps. So we'll take it from there. I guess starting place, reading the paperwork you filled out. So you worked on the presidential security detail.
Yes, I did.
What does that consist of?
Well, I was security, so I was military police officer, and then we got screened out of the schoolhouse. There were a variety of factors to go and do security there. There's based out of Quantico, Virginia. We're HMX 1, so we are. It started out as the first. I guess it was the first helicopter squadron that the Marines had, and so the X is for the experimentation or experimental. And so they have a lot of new birds that they test and fly out of HMX2. But the majority of our work was for the presidential support, and we had different helicopters that we had at the unit. The green tops and white tops. So the white tops that we guarded were like the iconic, if you think of the helicopter landing on the White House lawn and picking up the president, those were the birds that we had. So yeah, that was fun. I did a lot of travel and a lot of walking around in circles around the helicopter.
So when you say green tops and white tops, that's literally the top of the helicopter.
Correct.
Some of them were green,
Yeah.
some of them were white.
Yes.
So was that you? Were like when the president steps down off the helicopter and there's a Marine standing there, was that you?
Yeah. Being security, the crew chief would be on your right hand side. If you were the president walking down from the helicopter, your crew chief would be on your right hand side, and then your security Marines on the left hand side. We would carry pistols, so we have the white belt with the pistol round in the chamber right next to the president. It's pretty cool for a 19-year-old girl. And then we would also help support any VIPs, so other heads of states, the Pope, Secretary of State, stuff like that.
So is there do you have a memorabilia collection associated with this? Like of famous people you've met? Or?
Kind of. I don't have a lot of pictures. We weren't allowed to have, because of security reasons, we weren't allowed to take a lot of pictures. But I have a few. I was in the unit for a little over 4 years, which is a long time to be in a unit. But I was under President Bush and President Obama, so I have pictures with both of them. Condoleezza Rice, I don't have any pictures with her, but I did see her on several occasions. Not that she would be able to notice who I am, but... and both VPs did events with them, with their families. I did an event down whenever they christened a new boat after Bush, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I did an event. I was there and did the event with the whole family, the whole Bush family, which was pretty cool. So...
That is kind of cool.
I don't have an actual list of all the cool people I've seen, but...
So, without making it generic in terms of what that's like, but did that change your reality to see these people that most people only ever see on television and see them trip or be human beings?
Yeah, well, one of the prominent memories that stands out for me is one of the last events that I did with President Bush, and of course he served for 2 terms. So by the time that I was at the tail end of his presidency, and so presidents really do age. The job takes a really big toll on him, and no matter what they do, somebody hates them, one side or the other. So we were on a trip in Napa Valley. And he was there for some dinner recruiting party or something. I don't remember what it was. We obviously didn't get to go to those events. But we were out on this vineyard. It was a really beautiful location. And sometimes they'll allow media in to come do all the pictures and everything of them loading onto the helicopter and then flying off, because it is pretty cool. And I was doing his, whenever he was leaving and going back to D.C., he was going back to the airport to get onto Air Force One to go back to D.C. And he had been at like 6 different events that day. And all across the United States. He kind of hopped across the United States and was headed back home to do this big press release at like 8 a.m. In D.C. And so he had a really long day. We were just one of many stops. But we were his last one for the evening, and they said he was going to try to sleep on the way back on Air Force One. And so this was the first time we were in one of the smaller birds that you really don't see photographed that often. And so for part of that lift procedure, I actually shut the door. And so he's like sitting down and I'm shutting the door and I'm like less than a foot away from him. So I was really excited to be doing that. But so he gets in, we do the salute, he gets in, and I go to shut the door and we're pivoting all nice and neat. And I'm like, oh my God, there's the President of the United States sitting right here. And he has this, smiley face on, he's waving to everybody. And as we're about halfway done closing the door, he just kind of sits and relaxes, and he just looked exhausted. And so that really stuck out to me because I was all, excited to see him and everything, but he's just a man, and he's tired, and this is one of many events, and he has to have this smile plastered on his face, and people are going to be taking pictures of him and mocking him and questioning all the things that he's doing. And, the presidency has got to take such a huge toll on a person. So that makes me really respect the offices a lot more. There's a lot more behind-the-scenes stuff that goes on in government than what people realize.
That's actually a really cool story. How did you get there? So I'm assuming you're not in this little bitty helicopter flying across the country from D.C. to California to be there ahead of the president.
I have done a cross-country trip in a helicopter before. It took us 4 days. That wasn't as exciting as you might think, because you're in a helicopter that's vibrating for 8 hours, and you stop every 3 hours to refuel. So that's not typically how we travel. They just do that with the bigger birds because it's harder to take them down. But typically, whenever we do travel, we load up C-17s, the VH-60s, which is like a Black Hawk that they beef up with extra security and stuff, so they're a lot heavier and they're a lot bigger. They don't have the slide panel doors. They have double doors that open. Those, they fold back the wings and tuck the back and fold them up and shove them into a C-17 along with a whole bunch of boxes, huge trailer. Whenever HMX flies anywhere, whenever the president goes anywhere, we fly with him. And we take a whole crew for each and every stop. We get there a couple days before and stay for a while. And regardless or not of if he actually flies in our helicopters, we still go just for emergency reasons. As far as I know, we're the only nation that does that. So whenever we go over to other countries, they're usually really impressed. You really feel like an American. Carting around all this stuff that other people are like, oh, we just borrow their Navy's helicopter whenever we need it, But anyway, so it all packs up into a C-17. They cram us all in there. And then we fly to wherever we need to go. So
for a non-military audience, C-17s are the enormous Air Force cargo birds, right?
Well, there's a C-5, then there's a C-17, and then there's a C-130. And the C-130 would be like, I don't know, I think of like the Vietnam cargo planes with the 2 rotors on each side. C-17 is bigger than that. And a C-5 would be like a jetliner.
Okay.
And those are enormous. I got to see one of those. We stopped in, I don't know, when I was doing the cross-country thing, we stopped at an Air Force base, and they let us check out their C-5s, and they are just so big, you can't even believe it. Like, their tires that get tucked up underneath the plane are bigger than me. They're like 7 feet tall. It's wild.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is that you worked a lot not only with other Marines, but with the Air Force. Mm-hmm. Were there other agencies that you wound up working with?
Well, we were in the DC area. So we worked with a lot of those agencies. We worked a lot with Secret Service, obviously. Well, the Secret Service presidential, the uniform, not the money people, but the presidential detail. We worked a lot with them. We worked with a lot of the branches, typically Air Force. And of course Navy. Your Department of, I suppose.
I get that a lot from Marines. Was there actually was there rivalry there?
Well, I mean, I was part of a wing, so from what I hear, we're not the typical kind of Marines. The wings are a lot more laid back. And the only time we had corpsmen that flew with us, and I loved our corpsmen. They were great. They always had our back. If it was work related or got drunk in a bar related, they were always there for us. So I love the Navy. But we did go down for the trip where they named one of the new ships after Bush. We dealt a lot with the Navy. We were on there in their home turf, I guess you could say, and one of our guys got left on the boat. And so he was walking around, because we're not allowed to have cell phones or anything in our pockets. Heaven forbid you put something in your pocket. And he got left on the boat, and he said none of the Navy guys wanted to help him because he's just walking around lost in his blues. So
nothing in your pockets?
No.
So, where do you keep your wallet?
In your socks.
Really?
Did y'all not do that in the Army?
That is awesome.
Yeah, you can't put anything in your pockets; it'll stick out.
So what I'm hearing is that
in your blues,
those blues are very unforgiving.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely. That was one of the hard things about our unit, is that we were in our blues all the time to do events, and if it was hot, you were really hot, and if it was cold, you were really cold.
So you didn't get to wear an overcoat if it was snowing out.
No. So the only event, or the last event, I guess it was, I did a couple events with him, that I did with Dick Cheney. It was cold, and it was snowing in Virginia, and it was just bone-chilling cold, and you're allowed to wear warming layers underneath your blues, but you can only wear what'll fit.
Right.
So, and we only had the one pair of blues. So I had on some real thin leggings and a real thin shirt, underneath my blues. And I was freezing cold. I couldn't feel my ears. I couldn't feel my nose. I'm sure I had snot dripping down everywhere. And Cheney got delayed. Of course, they were always getting delayed. So I was out there for an extra 45 minutes, and it was freezing cold. Then it started to snow, and I was like, great. And then he finally gets there, and there's this stack of 10 people that are lined up. They won something or had an award. I don't know why they were there, but they were a special group that got to be there before. I don't know where he was coming in from, but we were taking him to the White House. And so they were all lined up, all excited to meet him. They of course, had real thick coats on and scarves and beanies. They looked warm. They were drinking hot chocolate and stuff. And so Dick Cheney gets off of the plane that he's on and comes walking over, and he greeted every single one of them and took pictures with every single one of them, which I was irritated with at about the time because I was cold, and I was just standing at attention in the cold, trying not to visibly shiver. But that was pretty cool that he, did stop and take the time to take pictures with all these guys before he loads up onto the plane. And he wasn't doing that for the press or anything, he was just doing that because he was a good guy. But I was freezing cold, and he did not stop and take a picture with me. So, yep, and I had my ID in my sock.
So I will ask the question, how does it feel to kind of be, I don't know, part of the wall hangings of power? In a way, is that something that you're proud of, or is it something that you kind of resent after a while? I'm a human being too.
Well, it kind of is, and I did a lot of events while I was there because I look good in my blues. But after a while, you're like, oh God, there's another event. Okay, because most of the events that we did were late at night, early in the morning. There's not any press there. You're not going to get any cool pictures. He's not going to stop and talk to you. It's not going to be awesome like, everybody back at home thinks it is. But you still have to go out there and do it in your blues, and you have to look nice. And just in case something happens, you have to be prepared and ready. So it does kind of get to that point after a while that you're like, oh yeah, I had to do that event, and Obama was late again, and so it kind of gets like that. But then there's still those times where you're like, that was really cool. The very first events, of course, stick out, and the first event that I did with ever was down in Texas with President Bush, and he wasn't even getting onto my helicopter. He was getting onto, sometimes we do 2 helicopters, and press was getting onto mine. And so he wasn't actually there, but that's the closest I had ever been to him before, and I could just barely see him underneath my cover. I actually had to borrow somebody's cover because mine, I forgot to grab it or something. It wasn't in yet. There was something weird going on. So I had to borrow this other girl's cover, and she had a really big head. So I had...
By cover, you mean hat?
Yeah.
What most people call a hat,
the blues hat, right. So before the event, we had shoved as much toilet paper around my head, bobby pins that you couldn't see, and I think I had a little towel in there too. So we crammed it all in there. So here I am, the first time I'm ever seeing the president, and I'm terrified that my cover's going to blow off, because that legitimately happens. Mm-hmm. And then everybody's going to see all this toilet paper on my head. That didn't happen. And then when I was standing out there, my cover was just slowly starting to slide down below my eyebrows and like covering up where I couldn't see anything. And I was like, I want to see him. And I saw his like waist down walk across, and I was like, oh my God, that was the president. Holy,
I saw the president's legs.
I know he was there. So, I'm sure everybody in the military has those stories where, it's that 5 seconds of, wow, that was really freaking cool. And then you have like 7 days of, oh my God, I'm so bored.
I hear that a lot. Is that just part of the military experience? That it's. I mean, I had one person tell me like that's the biggest difference between being in the real military and the movies.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have those moments where you're like, this is why I enlisted, yeah, And then all the rest of the time, it's like you're so bored you could, poke your eyes out. It's terrible.
So where did you enlist?
Well, I enlisted in 2006. I actually shipped out for boot camp on 9/11. And I made the decision to enlist when I was a junior in high school. I don't have a lot of immediate family that was in the military. I had an uncle that was in the Marines way back in the day, and that was pretty much it. And I actually had no idea about anything in the military. I just, 2005, 2006, surge was about to happen. Things were really ramped up. And we had been doing some history stuff in my classes in high school, and I had realized that over the generations there had been somebody from my family had been in every single major conflict, dating back. And I wanted to be the one from my generation. I didn't want to put it off on somebody else. So that's why I enlisted. A lot of people, I don't know, I heard a lot of stuff when I was enlisting about, oh, you couldn't get into college. People would tell me that to my face. Or they would say, oh, are you going to be a nurse? And I would say no. I graduated at the top of my class. I graduated from Texas, so I would have been automatically accepted into any state institution of my choosing. It was important to me to enlist. Of course, crushed my mom, she tried to talk me out of it for a while. And I initially said that I wanted to join the Army because I knew nothing about the military. I was like, everybody joins the Army, right? And then I went to the recruiting station, and the Army was gone to lunch, and so was the Air Force. And we didn't have a Navy recruiting station like they were somewhere else, but the Marines were there. So
it was literally because they didn't get a lunch that day. That was why it became a Marine.
Well, I eventually did talk to all the branches, but my recruiter, there was also this young 19-year-old hotshot that was in his blues, and I'm sorry, but Marines look the best in uniform. They do. They really do. Not so much females, but the males look the best in uniform.
Sharpest.
Yeah, it looks good. So that's what drew me in, I guess you could say.
Well, am I crazy, or did you marry a Marine?
I did. It was accidental. I always said I would never marry a Marine because I worked with them. I worked long hours, long night shifts with male Marines, and I heard their dirty stories about their females that they would date, and I didn't want any part of that. So I refused to date anybody within the unit. And my husband did not want to date within the unit. It was important for him to keep work and life separate, and things happen. We'll be married 5 years. Yeah, it turned out to be a good decision for us. Not a great decision for a lot of people in our unit.
Well, I'm wondering what your perception was, because 30 years ago, the idea of a woman with a pistol guarding the president would have been a very novel thing.
Well, not even 30 years ago. I mean, that's still pretty a novel. It's still a big thing. When I was in my unit, this was in, I think probably 2008, they did a big cover story in the Military Times, and another big newspaper picked it up, where it was the only reason I didn't get selected for the photo op was because there was another female that I worked with who had been in the unit longer, so they picked her. But they had two pilots, the co-pilot and then the main pilot, and then the crew chief, and then the security Marine. They did this whole media op where they were all females, and it was the first time that it had ever happened, and that was in 2008.
That's kind of, it's cool. I was going to ask you, did you feel it? Did you feel
that the Marines are 7% female?
Yes. Well, and did you feel pressure to be more, better, or different because you were a woman?
Well, I mean, there is a lot of discrimination in the military against females. There were jobs that were across the board not open to me. There were job designations and schools that I was straight up not allowed to apply for in my unit, like SRT, and different kind of...
SRT is?
Special Reaction Team, something to that effect. They're like the elite or whatever. Like a SWAT team kind of deal. But I wasn't allowed to. My command said, I want to apply for this school, and they said, no, we're going to send so and so because we don't want to send a female. Like, that stuff happens. I'm not that old. And I've had whenever we'd go out on trips and we'd go out to the bar, and somebody would buy rounds for everybody, but all the active duty, and not her.
Really?
I've talked to older guys, and of course you can't blame somebody. They're different generations, different times. But I have been in groups of guys in uniform talking to older guys, and they would refuse to look at me if I was in uniform. They wouldn't talk to me. But it's a different time. So there's definite divisions there. And there would be times where I would be on shift and I would be the only female. I wouldn't work with another female for a week or two. That wasn't uncommon. It did limit me in some places to be politically correct. If there were trips, females weren't allowed to go on a trip that another female wasn't available for, because they didn't want us having to share a room. Even if we weren't in the room at the same time, we weren't allowed legally to share a hotel room with another male Marine, even if he was on shift and I was sleeping, and then we swapped.
Just to avoid the appearance of impropriety?
Which I think is ridiculous, because just because you put a female and a male in a room together, we're still both Marines, and we're not going to, I'm in charge of my sexuality. I'm not going to just have sex with somebody just because we happen to be staying in the same hotel room. That's ridiculous.
Why not?
So, So there was a lot of that. I think a lot more than what people realize, and that's kind of why it was a little bit comical whenever the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell seemed to be a big deal on the civilian side of things. I remember going home and people asking me, what do you think about Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Oh my God, they repealed it. I'm from Texas, so everybody was shocked. And I was like, who cares? I've worked with people of all sorts of sexualities, and I'm a female, and I work with a bunch of males, and I'm not out having sex with all of them. Just the one that I'm married to. So,
that was kind of exactly where I was headed, because you depending on the person and their experience, sometimes you have people say, I really did not feel like, I felt like I was in a club that I wasn't fully a member of, and then I've heard people say, no, I was just the other guy that had really long hair.
Well, I do remember some. There were definitely things that I wasn't privy to, but same way that if you weren't a smoker and most of the people in your unit were, you'd feel kind of left out because everybody's going to the smoke pit to chat. But for the most part, I remember wives and girlfriends hated me with such a passion. And it would be where, we weren't supposed to have phones on shift or anything, but when you're working nights, you're probably going to call your girlfriend or your wife at some point. And they would say, shh, please don't talk, or I'd be at the gate with somebody on shift, and their wife or their girlfriend would roll through, and I'd go out and say hi to him. And I learned that if I didn't know them, I wouldn't do that. I would just stay in the guard shack so they couldn't see me, I guess, because then they would get the third degree. Why you spend more time with that girl than you do with me? And most of the guys that I worked with didn't view me like that. I had one guy who was a good buddy of mine, and we went out on a trip to dinner somewhere, and I had on makeup, and my hair was down, wasn't in a bun, and I had on normal clothes, not revealing or anything, just normal clothes. And somebody at the bar hit on me or something, and he was like, oh, I forget. Because I was another guy to them for a lot of guys, a lot of my closest guy friends. It was a lot of stress, I think, was caused for them because their wives or girlfriends would be mad that they would be spending, you're on shift with that girl all the time. Like,
so they were
it's not
threatened.
like that. Yeah, definitely. Even when I wasn't dating anybody, I would be like, oh, I'm married, I just don't wear my ring or whatever, so they wouldn't pounce on him. But it does get pretty wild.
Well, I'll ask you one other sort of different line of questioning. What made you decide to leave the Marine Corps?
It was my decision, and it kind of wasn't. So I had some medical problems, and I was medically held. But I was planning on getting out of the Marine Corps before all that happened. I went in with with an open mind, thinking I may stay in for 20, I may get out after 5. I had a 5-year enlistment. I thought that was normal. It's not. And so I went in with a very open mind. But when it came down to it, that just wasn't the life that I wanted to lead. We had a lot of guys in my unit who, after I'd been there for about a year or so, they all got orders for Japan, and they were leaving in 2 weeks. That's just really hard on your family. I did not deploy to like Iraq or Afghanistan or anything, but we were always on trip status, and we always had to be recallable to the unit. And when I got out, I had amassed almost 90 days, more than that. I think it must have been right around 100 of leave that I didn't use because I couldn't, because my leave got canceled, or I could only take 7 days at a time because the mission came first. When you're coming down to missions to protect the President of the United States, it's not going to matter that you haven't had leave in 6 months. I missed funerals, I missed weddings, I missed graduations because I couldn't get the time off to go see my family. And it just came down to the point where I decided that style of life wasn't for me. But I think I'll always, my next job is going to be in a military environment. I do miss the camaraderie. I do miss the certain aspects of being part of that club,
What is it? What do you anticipate your next job being?
I just got into occupational therapy school, so will be hopefully get my master's in that in 2 years. And I would love to work with a veteran population, just because of my injuries. I know from the veteran side of things how much it sucks to have a doctor who was not in the military and who has no idea what you're talking about when you mention acronyms or, missing not having an active lifestyle and things like that. So I want to continue to work with the veteran or possibly active duty population. I want to stay in that community, just not as an active duty component.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, well we are at about half an hour. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or anything you'd like to add to the record for anybody that might be listening to this in the future?
It depends. If you're a civilian, I would like to remind everybody that everybody's experience in the military is unique. Across the board, I think people don't anticipate the experience that they're going to have. My career, 5 years in the military, was 100% not what I ever could have expected at all. And I read everything I could about the Marines and boot camp and before I left, and that's just a different animal, I guess. And so not everybody has the same experiences. Don't pigeonhole people. And if you are interested, you should ask a veteran or an active duty component, how their experience was, and if they would like to talk about it, or what they did, where they were stationed, instead of just some kind of generic, thanks for your service. All right, I'm going to go about my life now. So that irritates me. And to go out and talk to some of the older veterans that are still around. They have a lot of cool, really, really cool stories. And you can never expect, sometimes they pull stuff out of a hat and you're like, whoa, you're a million times more cooler than I thought you were. And for the active duty components or veterans who may be listening, Marines are the best. Sorry. If you weren't a Marine, I'm sorry. Not all of us can be.
It's a nifty blue uniform, right?
But, not all of us Marines are dumb jar heads, too, so cut us some slack. And I guess that's about it. I think that covers everything.
Well, good. No, I'm
my life in half an hour.
Glad we had your life in half an hour. Hopefully it'll be much longer than that. So this has been 16th of January, 2015 at the Kramer Library. I've been talking to Tara Burns, Joseph Berg giving the interview, and thank you very much. We appreciate you participating.
Yeah.